The lead Thunderhawk dropped through the ruins, hovering a few meters above the ground, with its assault ramp down, and bolter fire sparking around the opening. Erland turned towards Tarvitz. "This isn't your fight," he yelled over the gunfire. "Get out of here!" "Emperor's children never run," replied Tarvitz, drawing his sword. "They do from this." No Space Marine could have survived the storm of fire that blazed away at the interior of the gunship, but it was no ordinary Space Marine that was born within it. With a roar like a hunting animal, Angron leapt from the gunship and landed with a terrible crash in the midst of the ruined city. He was a monster of legend, huge and terrible. The Primarch's hideous face was twisted in hatred, his huge chain axes battered and stained with decades of bloodshed. As the mighty Primarch landed, World Eaters dropped from the other gunships. Thousands of World Eaters loyal to the War Master followed their Primarch into the Coral City, accompanied by the war cries that echoed Angron's own bestial howl as he charged into his former brethren. Horus put his fist through the pict screen that showed the transmission from the Dies Irae. The image of the World Eater's gunship splintered under the assault as his anger at Angron's defiance boiled over. One of his allies, no, one of his subordinates, had disobeyed his direct order. Aximand, Abaddon, Erebus, and Malakhurst eyed him warily, and Horus could imagine their trepidation at the news of Angron's impetuous attack on the survivors of the virus bombing. That there were survivors at all was galling, but Angron's actions put a whole new spin on the Istvan campaign. "And yet," he said, choking back his rage, "I am surprised at this." "War Master," said Aximand, "what do you—" "Angron is a killer," snapped Horus, rounding on his Mournival son. "He solves every problem with raw violence. He attacks first and thinks later, if he thinks at all. And yet I never saw this. What else would he do when he saw the survivors of his legion in the Coral City? Would he sit back and watch the rest of the fleet bombard them from orbit? Never. And yet I did nothing." Horus glanced at the smashed remains of the pick display. "I will never be caught out like this again. There will be no twists of fate I do not see coming." "The question remains," said Aximand. "What shall we do about Angron?" "Destroy him with the rest of the city," said Abaddon without a pause. "If he cannot be trusted to obey his War Master, then he is a liability." "The World Eaters are an exceptionally effective weapon of terror," retorted Aximand. "Why destroy them when they can wreak so much havoc among those loyal to the Emperor?" "There are always more soldiers," said Abaddon. "Many will beg to join the War Master. There is no room for those who can't follow orders." "Angron is a killer, yes, but he is predictable," put in Erebus, and Horus bristled at the implicit insult in the first chaplain's words. "He can be kept obedient by letting him off the leash every now and again." "The word-bearers may live by treachery and lies," snarled Abaddon, "but in the Sons of Horus you are loyal or you are dead." "What do you know of my legion?" asked Erebus, rising to meet the first captain's ire, his mask of smirking calm slipping. "I know secrets that would destroy your mind. How dare you speak to me of deceit? This reality, all you know. This is the lie." "Erebus!" roared Horus, ending the confrontation instantly. "This is not the place to evangelize your legion. I have made my decision, and these are wasted words." "Then Angron will be destroyed in the bombardment?" asked Malakhurst. "No," replied Horus. "He will not." "But War Master, even if Angron prevails, he could be down there for weeks," said Aximand. "And he will not fight alone. Do you know, my sons, why the Emperor appointed me War Master?" "Because you are his favored son," replied Malakhurst. "You are the greatest warrior and tactician of the Great Crusade. Whole worlds have fallen at the mention of your name." "I did not ask for flattery," snarled Horus. "Because you never lose," said Abaddon levelly. "I never lose," nodded Horus, glaring between the four Astartes. "Because I see only victory. I have never seen a situation that cannot be turned into triumph, no disadvantage that cannot be turned to an advantage. That is why I was made War Master. On Davin I fell, yet came through that ordeal stronger. Against the Orician technocracy, we faced dissent from within our own fleet. So I used the conflict to rid us of those fomenting rebellion. There is no failing I cannot turn to a component in my victories. Angron has decided to turn Istvan III into a ground assault. I can consider this a failure and limit its impact by bombing Angron and his World Eaters into dust, along with the rest of the planet. Or I can forge a triumph from it that will send echoes far into the future. Malaghurst broke the silence that followed. What would you have us do, War Master? Inform the other legions that they are to prepare for a full assault on the Loyalists in the Coral City. Ezekiel, assemble the legion. Have them ready to launch the attack in 2 hours. I shall be proud to lead my legion, said Abaddon. You will not lead them. That honor will go to Sedere and Targost. Anger flared in Abaddon. But I am the first captain. This battle, where resolve and brutality are qualities required for victory, is tailor-made for me. You are a captain of the Mournival, Ezekiel, said Horus. I have another role in mind for you and little Horus in this fight. One I feel sure you will relish. Yes, War Master, said Abaddon, the frustration disappearing from his face. As for you, Erebus, War Master, stay out of our way. To your duties, sons of Horus. Chapter 13. Maggard. Factions. Lunar Wolves. Princeps Turnit listened intently as the orders came through. Though Kassar couldn't hear the orders piped into the Princeps' ear, and he didn't want to. It was all he could do to keep from vomiting. Every time he let his mind wander outside the systems of the Dies Irae, he saw nothing but the tangles of charred ruins. His consciousness retreated within the machine, pulling his perception back into the massive form of the Titan. The Dies Irae was coming back to life around him. He could sense the god machine's limbs flood with power, and he could feel the weapons reloading. The plasma reactor at its heart was beating in time with his own, a ball of nuclear flame that burned with the Emperor's own righteous strength. Even here, among all this death and horror, the Emperor was with him. The god machine was the instrument of his will, standing firm among the destruction. That thought comforted Kassar and helped him focus. If the Emperor was here, then the Emperor would protect. Orders in from the Vengeful Spirit, said Turnit briskly. Moderati, open fire. Open fire, said Arukan. Sir? The Istvanians are gone. They're dead. To Kassar, Arukan's voice sounded distant, for he was subsumed in the systems of the Titan. But he heard Turnit's voice as clearly as if he had spoken in his own ear. Not at the Istvanians, replied Turnit. At the Death Guard. Princeps? Said Arukan. Fire on the Death Guard? I am not in the habit of repeating my orders, Moderati, replied Turnit. And they are to fire on the Death Guard. They have defied the War Master. Kassar froze. As if there wasn't enough death on Istvan III. Now the Dies Irae was to fire on the Death Guard, the very force they had been sent to support. Sir, he said, this doesn't make any sense. It doesn't need to, shouted Turnit, his patience finally at an end. Just do as I order. Looking straight into Turnit's eyes, the truth hit Titus Kassar, as though the Emperor had reached out from terror and filled him with the light of truth. The Istvanians didn't do this, did they? He asked. The War Master did. Turnit's face creased in a slow smile, and Kassar saw his hand reaching towards his holstered sidearm. Kassar didn't give him the chance to get there first, and snatched for his own auto pistol. Both men drew their pistols and fired. Maggard took a step forwards, drawing his golden Turlian blade and unholstering his pistol. His bulk was even more massive than Sindaman remembered, grossly swollen to proportions beyond human and more reminiscent of an Astartes. Had that been Maggard's reward for his services to the War Master? Without wasting words of preamble, Cruz raised his bolter and fired, but Maggard's armor was the equal of Astartes' plate, and the shot simply signaled the beginning of a duel. Sindaman and Mercedy ducked as Maggard's pistol spat fire, the noise appalling as the two warriors ran towards one another with their guns blazing. Keeler watched calmly as Maggard's gunfire blew chunks from Cruz's armor, but before he could fire any more, Cruz was upon him. Cruz smashed his fist into Maggard's midriff, but the silent killer rode the punch and swung his sword for the Astartes' head. Cruz ducked back from the great slash of Maggard's sword, the blade slicing through the armor at the Astartes warrior's stomach. Blood sprayed briefly from the wound, and Cruz dropped to his knees in sudden pain before drawing his combat knife, the blade as long as a mortal warrior's sword. Maggard leapt towards him, and his sword hacked a deep gouge in Cruz's side. Yet more blood spilled from the venerable Astartes' body. Another killing strike slashed towards Cruz, but this time, combat knife and Curlian blade met in a shower of fiery sparks. Cruz recovered first and stabbed his blade through the gap between Maggard's greaves. The assassin stumbled backwards, and Cruz rose unsteadily to his feet. The assassin stepped in close and lunged with his sword. Maggard was almost the equal of Cruz in physique and had youth on his side, but even Sindaman could see he was slower, as if his new form was unfamiliar, not yet worn in. Cruz sidestepped a huge arcing strike of Maggard's sword and swung inside his opponent's defense, reaching around to lock his head in the crook of his elbow. His other arm snapped round to plunge the knife into Maggard's throat, but a fist seized Cruz's hand in an iron grip, halting the blade inches from the man's pulsing jugular. Cruz fought to force the blade upwards, but Maggard's newly enhanced strength was the greater, and he began to force the blade to one side. Beads of sweat popped on Cruz's face, and Sindaman knew that this was a struggle he could not win alone. He pushed himself to his feet and ran towards Maggard's fallen pistol, its matte black finish cold and lethal looking. Though designed for a mortal grip, the pistol still felt absurdly huge in his hands. Sindaman held the heavy pistol outstretched and marched towards the struggling warriors. He couldn't risk a shot from any kind of distance. He was no marksman and was as likely to hit their deliverer as their killer. He walked up to the fight and placed the muzzle of the pistol directly on the bleeding wound where Cruz had stabbed Maggard. He pulled the trigger, and the recoil of the shot almost shattered his wrist, but the effect of his intervention more than made up for the trauma. Maggard opened his mouth in a silent scream, and his entire body flinched in sudden agony. Maggard's grip on the knife weakened, and, with a roar of anger, Cruz punched it into the base of his opponent's jaw and through the roof of his mouth. Maggard buckled and fell to the side with the force of a falling tree. The golden-armored assassin and the Astartes rolled, and Cruz was on top of his enemy, still gripping the knife. Face to face for a moment. Maggard spat a mouthful of blood into Cruz's face. Cruz pushed the knife deeper into Maggard's jaw, plunging it into his opponent's brain. Maggard spasmed, his huge bulk thrashing briefly, and when he stopped, Cruz was looking into a pair of blank, dead eyes. Cruz pushed himself from Maggard's body. "Face to face," said Cruz, breathing heavily with the exertion of killing Maggard. "Not with treachery. From 1,000 miles up. Face to face." He looked at Sindaman and nodded his thanks. The warrior was wounded and exhausted, but there was a calm serenity to him. "I remember how it used to be," he said. "We were brothers on Chthoniya. Not just among ourselves, but with our enemies too. That was what the Emperor saw in us when he came to the Hives. We were gangs of killers as existed on 1,000 other worlds, but we believed in a code that was more precious than life. That was what he wrought into the Lunar Wolves. I thought that even if none of the rest of us remembered, the War Master would, because he was the one the Emperor chose to lead us." "No," said Keeler. "You are the last one." And when I realized that, I just told them what they wanted to hear. I tried to be one of them, and I succeeded. I almost forgot everything, until now. "The music of the spheres," said Sindaman quietly. Cruz's eyes focused again on Keeler, and his face hardened. "I did nothing half-heard," said Keeler, answering his unasked question. "You said so yourself." The ways of Chthoniya were the reason the Emperor chose you and your brothers for the Lunar Wolves. Perhaps it was the Emperor who reminded you. I saw this coming for so long. But I let it, because I thought that was my code now. But nothing changed, not really. The enemy just moved from out there to amongst us. Look, as profound as this all is, can we get the hell out of here? Asked Mercedy. Cruz nodded and beckoned them towards the Thunderhawk gunship. You're right, Miss Hollerton. Let's get off this ship. It is dead to me now. We're with you, Captain, said Cinnamon, as he gingerly picked his way over Maggott's body after Cruz. The years seemed to have dropped from him, as if the energy lost in the fight was returning with interest. Cinnamon saw a light in his eyes he hadn't seen before. Watching the light of understanding rekindled in Yacht Cruz reminded Cinnamon that there was still hope. And there was nothing so dangerous in the galaxy as a little hope. Turnit's shot went high, and Kassar's went wide. Jonah Arukin ducked for cover as the rounds ricocheted on the curved ceiling of the bridge. Turnit rolled down behind the command chair as Kassar pulled himself from his own chair, set deep into the cockpit floor and level with the Titan's eye. Kassar fired again, and sparks showered as the auto-pistol round hit the electronics arrayed around Turnit's chair. Turnit fired back, and Kassar dropped into the cover of the depression formed by his own seat. The connectors had torn free from his scalp as he moved, and tears of blood streaked his face, metallic monofilament wires clinging wetly to the back of his neck. His mind throbbed with the suddenness of being ripped away from the God Machine. Titus! Yelled Arukin. What are you doing? Moderati, surrender, or you will die here! Shouted Turnit. Throw down your weapon and surrender! This is treachery! Shouted Kassar. Jonah, you know I am right. The War Master did this. He brought death to this city to kill the believers. Turnit fired blindly from behind the elaborate machinery of the command seat. Believe? You would betray your War Master because of this religion? You're diseased, do you know that? Religion is a sickness, and I should have put you down a long time ago. Kassar thought rapidly. There was only one way out of the cockpit. The doorway that led into the Titan's dorsal cavity, where the plasma generator was located, along with a detail of engineer crewmen who operated it. He couldn't run, for fear of Turnit shooting him dead as he broke from cover. But the same was true of Turnit. They were both trapped. You knew, said Kassar, about the bombardment. Of course I knew. How can you be so ignorant? Don't you even know what's happening on this planet? The Emperor is being betrayed, said Kassar. There is no Emperor, shouted Turnit. He abandoned us. He left the Imperium that men died to conquer for him. He doesn't care. But the War Master cares. He conquered this galaxy, and it is his to rule. But there are fools who don't understand that. They are the ones who have forced the War Master into this so that he can do what must be done. Kassar's mind grew. Turnit had betrayed everything the Emperor had built, and the combat within the command bridge struck Kassar as representative of what was happening in the wider conflict. Turnit rose and fired wildly as he ran for the door, both shots smacking into the bridge wall behind Kassar. I won't let you do this, yelled Kassar, returning fire. His first shot went wide, but now Princeps Turnit was struggling with the wheel lock of the door. Kassar lined up his shot on Turnit's back. Titus, don't do it, shouted Arukin, wrenching the Titan's primary motor controls around. The Titan lurched madly, the whole bridge tipping like the deck of a ship in a storm. Kassar was thrown back against the wall, the opportunity to take his shot gone. Turnit hauled the door open, throwing himself from the Titan's bridge and out of Kassar's firing line. Kassar scrambled to his feet again as the Titan rocked upright. A shape moved in front of him, and he almost fired before realizing it was Jonah Arukin. Titus, come on, said Arukin. Don't do this. I don't have a choice. This is treachery. You don't have to die. Kassar jerked his head towards the Titan's eye, through which they could still see the Death Guard moving through the death-slick trenches. Neither do they. You know I am right, Arukin. You know the War Master has betrayed the Imperium. If we have the Dies Irae, then we can do something about it. Arukin looked from Kassar's face to the gun in his hand. It's over, Kassar. Just give this up. With me or against me, Jonah, said Kassar levelly. The Emperor's faithful or his enemy? Your choice. It had often been said that a space marine knew no fear. Such a statement was not literally true. A space marine could know fear, but he had the training and discipline to deal with it and not let it affect him in battle. Captain Saul Tarvitz was no exception. He had faced storms of gunfire and monstrous aliens, and even glimpsed the insane predators of the warp. But when Angron charged, he ran. The Primarch smashed through the ruins like a juggernaut. He bellowed insanely, and with one sweep of his chain axe, carved 2 loyal World Eaters in 2, bringing his offhand axe down to bite through the torso of a third. His traitor World Eaters dived over the rubble, blasting with pistols or stabbing with chain blades. "Die!" bellowed Captain Erlen, as the Loyalists countercharged, throwing themselves into the enemy as one. Tarvitz was used to Astartes who fought in feints and countercharges, overlapping fields of fire, picking the enemy apart or sweeping through his ranks with grace and precision. The World Eaters did not fight with the perfection of the Emperor's children. They fought with anger and hatred, with brutality and the lust for destruction. And they fought with more hatred than ever before against their own, against the battle brothers they had warred alongside for years. Tarvitz scrambled back from the carnage. World Eaters shouldered past him as they charged at Angron. But the butchered bodies lying around showed what fate awaited them. Tarvitz put his shoulder down and hammered through a ruined wall, sprawling into a courtyard where statues stood scarred and beheaded by the day's earlier battles. He glanced behind him. Thousands of World Eaters were locked in a terrible hurricane of carnage, scrambling to get at one another. At the center of the bloody hurricane was Angron, massive and terrible as he laid about him with his axes. Captain Erlen crashed down a short distance from him, and the World Eater's eyes flickered over Tarvitz before he rolled onto his back and pulled himself to his feet. Erlen's face was torn open, a red mask of blood with his eyes the only recognizable feature. A pack of World Eaters descended on him, piling him to the ground and working at him as though they were carving up a side of meat. Volleys of bolter shots thudded through the walls, and the battle spilled into the courtyard, World Eaters wrestling with one another and forcing bolters up to fire point blank or disemboweling their battle brothers with chainmail. Tarvitz kicked himself to his feet and ran as a wall collapsed and a dozen traitors surged forward. He threw himself behind a pillar, bolt shells blasting chunks of marble from it in concussive impacts. The sound of battle followed him, and Tarvitz knew that he had to try and find the Emperor's children. Only with his fellow warriors alongside him could he impose some form of order on this chaotic fight. Tarvitz ran, realizing that gunfire was directed at him from all angles. He charged through the ruins of a grand dining hall and into a cavernous stone-walled kitchen. He kept running and smashed his way through the ruins until he found himself in the streets of the Coral City. A burning gunship streaked overhead and crashed into a building in an orange plume of flame as gunfire stuttered throughout the ruins he had just vacated, and Angron's roaring cut through the din of battle. The magnificent dome of the Precentor's palace rose above the battle, unfolding across the blackened remains of the city. As Tarvitz made his way through the carnage towards his beloved Emperor's children, he promised that if he was to meet his death on this blasted world, then he would meet it amongst his battle brothers, and in death defy the hatred the War Master had sown amongst them. Loken watched the sons of Horus landing on the far side of the Siren Hold. His Space Marines, he couldn't think of them as sons of Horus anymore, were arrayed around the closest tomb spire in a formidable defensive formation. His heavy weapons commanded the valley of shrines through which attackers would have to advance, and the tactical Marines held hard points of ruins where they would fight on their own terms. But the enemy was not the Istvanian army. They were his brothers. "I thought they'd bomb us," said Torgadon. "They should have done," replied Loken. "Something went wrong." "It'll be Abaddon," said Torgadon. "He must have been itching for a chance to take us on face to face. Horus couldn't have held him back." "Or Sedire," echoed Loken, distaste in his voice. The afternoon sun hung in veils between the shadows cast by the walls and the tomb spires. "I never thought it would end like this, Tariq," said Loken. "Maybe storming some alien citadel or defending Terra. Like something from the epic poems. Something romantic, something the Remembrancers could get their teeth into."
I never thought it could end defending a hole like this against my own battle brothers. Yes, but then you always were an idealist.
The sons of Horus were coming down on the far side of the tomb spire across the valley, the optimal point to strike from, and Loken knew that this would be the hardest battle he would ever have to fight.
We don't have to die here,
said Torgadden.
Loken looked at him. I know. We can win. We can throw everything we have at them. I'll lead them in from the front, and then there's a chance that... No, said Torgadden. I mean, we don't have to hold them here. We know we can get through the main gates into the city. If we strike for the Precentor's palace, we could link up with the Emperor's children or the World Eaters. Lucius said the warning came from Saul Tarvitz, so they know we are betrayed. Saul Tarvitz is on Istvan III?
Asked Loken, sudden hope flaring in his heart.
Apparently so, nodded Torgadden. We could help them. Fortify the palace.
Loken looked back across the tangle of shrines and tomb spires.
You would retreat. I would when there's no chance of victory, and we can fight on better terms elsewhere.